Hello, in this video I want to say something about a very relevant topic, and that topic is demographic decline. At this point, I do think that most people are aware of the fact that every single country is experiencing a drop in fertility rates. Even countries like Chad and Niger that still have a very high fertility rate are experiencing a drop in fertility rates, and if they continue this trend, one day they're also going to reach the rate that is below replacement rate, and that is 2.1 births per woman. Now, not that long ago, we still lived in a world in which we feared overpopulation, which is why I think that many people haven't really registered that demographic decline is going to be a big problem very soon. But okay, let me first start with the observation that all these fears of overpopulation that actually throughout history have been more present than fears of demographic decline. We call those fears Malthusian fears. Thomas Malthus was a British political economist in the 18th century who formulated this theory according to which humans are going to rise in population faster than our food supply. So he noticed that something very strange was happening in the 18th century, especially in China. You know, China finally experienced a period of peace after it was united by the Qin dynasty, and also technology was getting better. New types of food entered China, like potatoes, and Europe was also experiencing this huge demographic growth. And Malthus was worried that we are simply going to multiply faster than our food supply, and that we are going to then just die from starvation. You know, that sometimes happens to crickets. In Europe, that problem was solved by colonialism. You know, that growing population then went on to colonize America and some other places. Well, China, on the other hand, got colonized and then again lost a lot of people in the Opium Wars. But okay, on the one hand, we are now experiencing a bizarre situation in which some areas of the world really are suffering from overpopulation, like some places in China, in Africa, in India. But very soon, if these trends continue, of course, even those places will be suffering from demographic decline. But as I'm making this video, some places obviously still are suffering from overpopulation. But okay, now I want to analyze why was Malthus wrong. You know, why his theory did not end up being true. You know, why didn't we all just end up like crickets? You know, we multiplied too much, then we ate all the food and died. Well, Malthus was unable to predict that we are also going to invent new fertilizers, new technology that is going to allow us to create a lot of food. And famines, where they do exist, are mostly political. They are also sometimes made worse by climate change that destroys harvests in Africa. But yeah, they are mostly political famines, that is. So Malthus, for example, he also never would have guessed that one day we are going to have subterranean farms. You know, that seemed crazy in the 18th century. And so I'm hoping that the same thing ends up happening with demographic decline. You know, in the 18th century, people couldn't even think about subterranean farms, and maybe something like that ends up saving us from demographic decline. You can tell me in the comment section if you think that that's going to happen. Mao Zedong is also an example of a figure who was convinced that the Chinese economy will soon experience a lot of problems due to this post-war boom of birth rates in China. And that's why Mao Zedong was very nonchalant about killing a lot of his people. He was convinced even that might be necessary for the Chinese economy to sustain itself. Many historians kind of agree that there was at least one of his reasons for killing so many people, like Jung Chang implies that there was one of Mao's motives, and China did end up enforcing a one child policy, which end up being pretty bad for the Chinese demographic picture right now. But what Malthus also never could have predicted was, well, what ended up happening to the birth rates. You know, to Malthus, it would have seemed crazy that at one point in history we would be experiencing such low birth rates. But also what's interesting, you know, so not all places are going to experience this demographic decline at the same time, which in theory then could lead to a new geopolitical map of the world in which some countries will get conquered by others that have a better demographic picture. Japan is a good example of a country that also decided to let absolutely zero immigrants in, and they have a low birth rate, you know, so that is going to be a problem for Japan. They also have a massive debt. So I do think that what's happening in Japan right now will be happening to Europe in like 20 years. South Korea is also in a pretty bad shape when it comes to birth rates. They have even lower birth rates than Japan, so below 1. But South Korea is letting immigrants enter their country. So, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the Japanese do, because in a way Japan will be a test ground for the rest of the world. Now, you could point out to the fact that the Black Death, according to some estimates, killed between 40 and 50% of the European population in the 14th century, and the consequences of that actually ended up being pretty good for those that survived. So the peasants, for example, that survived the Black Death actually ended up having a better life, because the feudal lords, after a long time, could no longer afford to just massively slaughter them like they did during peasant rebellions. So the price of labor actually went up. You know, so the man-to-land ratio was better at the end of the 14th century than before it. Here you can see that famous image of a man playing chess with death. That medieval art ended up inspiring Bergman's movie, The Seventh Seal. But what we also should acknowledge, you know, the plague often killed older people. What is unique about this situation that is waiting for us, like 20 years in the future, in many places, is that for the first time in history, we are going to have more old people than young. And is that economically sustainable is the question. You know, what about the pensions? Will people just have to work until they die? That is one option, I guess. Here you can see in Nigeria, you know, they still have a population pyramid. You know, it used to be called a pyramid for a reason. It's supposed to look like a pyramid. When I say supposed to, I'm talking about the presupposition that all capitalist economies assume. So capitalism is founded on this idea of economic growth that goes forever. Now, a good argument against capitalism, I guess, would be to ask, is that really possible? Maybe not, you know. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a problem, you know, how are all these countries going to return their debt if there isn't a next generation of taxpayers who is going to do dangerous jobs in the construction or in the military if we stop having young men. So one possible solution that Japan is already using is really automatization. So we could use robots as waiters, for example, self-driving cars. AI has already started to even replace writers, you know, so maybe even programmers and writers will be replaced by technology. But the problem is you still need to have somebody that's going to use all these services. Somebody needs to go to a robot cafe and spend money in order for the economy to actually work. Yuval Noah Harari actually mentions in one of his books that some scientists believe that in the next 50 years we might be able to prolong life. So there might be a caste of ultra rich people that will live until they are 150 years old. So that would definitely change our demographic picture, especially if they manage to somehow slow aging. But that still to me sounds a bit crazy, you know. I'm not expecting that to happen, but that could be a potential solution. Maybe you've heard of this experiment that was done in 1968 by a famous biologist, John C. Calhoun. Now, for whatever reason, this experiment is really popular in right-wing circles of the internet right now. The irony is that the experiment was originally done to show that overpopulation is actually bad, which seems to go against the ideas of Elon Musk and some people that actually do not believe that overpopulation is bad. So Calhoun wanted to see what happens to mice when you give them unlimited resources and no natural predators and just put them in a giant cage. At first, they ended up having a lot of babies. But then at one point, the entire society collapsed. Women lost the interest in men. Even some men lost interest in female mice and in socializing. Some would say that they are the equivalent of hikikomoris or of incels. Also, gay sex increased among the mice. And in the end, the entire society stopped producing children and they ended up going extinct. And now some people would say that the same thing is happening to our society because we have become too weak. Now, why have we become too weak? Some interpretations, usually on the far right, say because of lack of war in many parts of the world, or because of welfare or technology or something like that. But I see a couple of problems with such arguments. Financially speaking, all normal people agree that we, the people of today, do not have it easy. In fact, in many ways, we have it much harder than our grandparents, of course, depending on what country we are talking about. Also, countries that do have war, like Russia and Ukraine, do not have a high birth rate. Israel is here actually an exception. Even if we look at countries that not so long ago had a war, like Croatia and Bosnia, they have a low birth rate. So I do not buy this argument that having wars will increase your birth rate. And I also do not buy this argument, you know, that we have kind of become too weak and spoiled by technology and by welfare, and that's why our societies are decaying. One could simply make the argument that overcrowdedness, you know, that it's simply not natural for so many mice and people to be in the same place, you know, to live in cities. But the problem is then you're arguing against modernity and against life in cities, and I'm not sure, you know, how do we then solve this problem, you know? Do we actually say, you know what, Pol Pot was right, let's all go to live in the countryside? He actually tried to do it and also killed 40% of his country in the process. But okay, he did also start a war with Vietnam. But okay, and one conclusion of the experiment, of course, could be that men and mice are simply not the same. You know, what happened to mice is not necessarily going to happen to people, because we are far more intelligent and we can try to implement certain policies that will change the outcome of what is happening. That to me actually seems to be also a valid conclusion. But let me finish on a optimistic note. So we are also faced with a problem that stems from the opposite phenomenon, and that is global warming is being made worse by more people being born. You know, those people then go on to purchase cars, they go on to eat meat, which then leads to more cows being grown and releasing more methane into the atmosphere. So on the one hand, we are stuck between two hellish scenarios. One scenario is global warming gets worse due to there being even more people, and the other scenario is like we go extinct because of lack of sexual relationships between men and women. And climate change already is making a lot of problems. You know, more storms. Some places are going to become too warm very soon to be hospitable to humans, like many tropical areas, the Middle East. That's going to create a lot of migration. So yeah, definitely, if we just kept the birth rates high, that would also result potentially in something horrible. I mean, in theory, we could all switch to green energy, but that's not happening for multiple reasons. So we do seem to be stuck with two opposite problems, you know, global warming and declining birth rates. So yeah, at least, you know, if the birth rate goes down, that is going to be good for global warming. But then again, some crazy solution like dropping a chemical into atmosphere that's going to lower the temperature, that might be a solution. But now to finish with an ancient wisdom, a Greek philosopher once said that the only thing that's stable in history is that there is constant change. You know, so there was never this time when everybody was happy and had no problems. Our ancestors had World War One, then they had the rise of fascism, World War Two, then there was totalitarian communism. Not that long ago, my grandparents and parents lived under communism for a long time, and actually, the irony was, economically speaking, you were probably, you know, an average guy probably had a better wage and a better rent price and house prices under communism than today. But I digress. I mean, there was definitely less freedom, and yeah, you lived in a totalitarian society. So my point is, our ancestors definitely were also faced with difficult tasks, just in the 20th century, not to mention all the other things before that. No generation is without some huge problems that are happening on a collective scale. So yeah, I do think that in the same way in which we as humanity managed to survive fascism and then totalitarian communism, I do think that we definitely have the potential to also survive both climate change and declining birth rates. How is that going to happen? I don't know, but Malthus still wouldn't have been able to predict our technology of today or subterranean farms. In the same way, people that lived through both world wars now would be shocked to see a world with a world which is mostly peaceful. Okay, if you like this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and tell me in the comment section what do you think will end up happening as a result of demographic decline.